Okay, awesome. Again, so we're going to talk about how you can prepare for graduate school interviews, which will be coming up in the next couple of months. So today we're going to talk about what to expect during these interviews, how you can prepare for interviews, so what questions you might be asked, and also what questions you can ask faculty and graduate students, as well as what kind of information might be important or helpful to gather during these interviews. And then we'll end with a graduate student Q&A where we'll break out into some breakout rooms. I'm joined by the lovely Maria and Hannah today, who will be helping me out and answering your questions. Okay, so for what to expect during graduate school interviews, it's important to note that some universities might have interviews and others may not. So you may not even receive an interview invitation. Some universities and programs just kind of go directly to the offers stage. However, if a university does have an interview, this could take place either online or in person. So I know with the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of interviews were able to be moved to virtual settings or online settings. And I think a lot of universities are still keeping up with the virtual interview setting. But also some universities may be moving to more in-person interviews or activities as well. So there could be a mix of the two. Some interviews might only be one day and others could be several days long. So for example, for virtual interviews, it might be spread out over a couple of days just so you're able to meet and talk with all of the faculty and graduate students that they want you to meet. And some interviews, especially if they're in person, it might be kind of concentrated into just one full day of activities. And then, in addition to interviews, some universities may also host in person visits post interview. So, this could be kind of considered like an accepted student's day. Okay, so why do interviews happen? From the university perspective, the main goal for the university and faculty is to pretty much gather information to make the ultimate decision on which students to accept into the program. So they'll be looking for things like potential red flags. They might be assessing your overall fit within the lab, the program, the student body, as well as kind of estimating the likelihood of the applicant and whether they might attend their university if they are extended an offer. From the applicant's perspective, so from your perspective, there's kind of two main common goals for completing interviews. So the first goal is to make a good impression. So like I mentioned, from the university's perspective, just being prepared to talk about your fit with the program and the university and why you'd be really excited to attend that university if you were extended an offer. And then the second goal would be to gather information to help you decide if the university is a good fit for you. So not only is the new university kind of interviewing you to assess fit, you're also interviewing the university to assess if they would be a good fit for your training goals. So figuring out which labs are available to take graduate students, particularly if it's like a rotation-based program, understanding the specific structure and milestones of each graduate program, and just getting a feel of the overall program and university environment, as well as things like quality of life, work-life balance, the city or environment you'll be living in, and any other benefits or support that are offered to students. Okay, so what will happen once you do get an interview? A couple of days prior to the interview date, you should receive a schedule or an itinerary of what kinds of meetings and gatherings and socials you might be attending during the interview days or day. So, for example, you will likely have some one-on-one interviews with several PIs or faculty. This will likely be the PIs or professors that you indicated interest for in your application, as well as some other affiliated faculty within the department. You may also have some one-on-one or group interviews with graduate students, for example, in labs of interest. You'll also go through some presentations on program information. So this is where they can convey just general program information like degree requirements, milestones, classwork, things like stipend, teaching requirements, student life, etc. Then you'll also likely go through some science or social gatherings with graduate students and faculty. So these can be more formal gatherings with faculty and graduate students combined, where they talk about science and research happening in the department. Or it could be a more informal setting, for example, with just graduate students, where you're able to chat with current grad students and ask questions. And then finally, if your interview is in person, they likely will have some fun activities planned in the city. So that could be either like a campus tour or maybe a dinner or evening out. Okay, so now after you've received an interview invitation, there's a couple things you can do to prepare for these interviews. So you'll want to prepare how you present yourself and also prepare answers to potential questions you could receive, as well as prepare some questions that you can ask potential PIs and graduate students. So first, to present yourself, you'll want to dress appropriately. So whether it's a virtual or in-person interview, making sure you're wearing proper like business attire. At least for virtual, whatever you can see on the screen, making sure you're dressed appropriately. Another tip is to keep organized notes. So this could be with a notebook or just a Word document open on your screen, just to not jot down important information that you learn throughout the interviews to make sure you don't forget, even though interviews can be very long and it can be a very stressful day. Just writing a couple of notes about what you learn can be helpful so you can go back and review it at a later time. If virtual, keeping your background clear and quiet, so being in a quiet room in your house or finding a private workspace where you can take the interview and having a clear and clean background. So either facing a wall, for example, or having one of these plain Zoom backgrounds can be helpful. Also, make sure to get a good night's sleep beforehand and eat a good breakfast. Oftentimes, interview days can last all day long, so they can start at 9 a.m., for example, with a program presentation and could go all the way into the evening for student socials and things like that. So just making sure you get a good night's sleep before a long day of interviews. And then finally, not to speak badly of other universities or PIs. So it's important to note that everyone you're talking to, including graduate students, are involved in the interview process and do have some say in admissions and offers and things like that. So just remember to always be in interview mode, even when you're attending some of these like student socials and things like that. Okay, so to prepare answers for potential questions that you could receive, we recommend practicing an elevator pitch. So, about 1 to 2 minutes of your previous work or research experience, as well as what you're interested in doing in graduate school. And you're likely to repeat these elevator pitches to a lot of different people. So, it's good to just have one on deck and ready to talk to for other people. You'll also want to practice discussing your previous work or research experience and the specific contributions you made to the lab or the project, as well as responding to others' work on the fly, so including asking questions about their work. And then finally, you'll want to be ready to discuss why you're interested in that specific university and program and potentially that specific lab if you applied directly to a PI. And a great way to practice all of these answer preps is to do mock interviews. So if you're able to find a graduate student you know, or maybe the current PI that you're working under would be willing to set up a mock interview, this is a great way to practice answers for those questions. So these are just some common interview questions that you might receive on interview day. So again, similar questions about why this program or university or this field of study, which lab you're interested in joining and why, things about your future career goals. So perhaps where do you see yourself in 5 years or 10 years? And then, of course, talking about your previous research experience at what you've learned, as well as what research questions you like to answer as a graduate student. So the STAR method can be a helpful way to answer these questions, particularly when you're talking about your previous work or research experience. So you'll want to start with the situation, so providing the necessary details about, for example, where you worked or what lab you were in and what project you worked on. Then describing the task, so what you were responsible doing or what task you needed to complete for the lab, as well as the action. So explaining how you carried out the task. So for example, I analyzed X number of samples, or I recruited X number of participants and completed interviews, etc. And then finally ending with the results. So how did the project go? How was the task completed? What was the end result? And potentially talking about any deliverables you might have been involved in. So perhaps a poster or a presentation. Okay, and then finally, you'll want to prepare questions to ask PIs or graduate students there. So for your PI of interest or labs of interest, we recommend reading the most recent or impactful publications from each PI you're interviewing with, as well as preparing questions for these specific publications or research. Another helpful tip is to look over lab websites, paying attention to the current projects and lab members, so you can be kind of aware of what work is currently being done in the lab, as well as maybe future directions. Okay, so interviews are a really great way to gather a lot of information about the program and the university and to decide if it would be a good fit for your training goals. So, some more general information that you can gather, perhaps from a graduate program advisor or graduate students, are also great resources for answers for these questions. Are things like salary and benefits. So, for example, your stipend. Is it consistent from year to year? Are there requirements such as being a teaching assistant? Are there semester fees? Are you able to work other jobs at the same time? Also, questions about healthcare. So, is healthcare offered for graduate students in this program? Does it include dental, vision, mental health care coverage? And are you able to add dependents? As well as any other possible benefits that could be available for graduate students. So, for example, free parking, maternity or paternity leave, or reduced grad student housing. You can also ask about just general program information. So, for example, the number of classes and electives that are required. If it's a rotation-based program, how many rotations are required, as well as any requirements for milestones. So, things like candidacy and dissertation defense. As well as things like just program support. So, what is the availability of leave or the option to master out, and maybe external funding support options in the department. From professors or faculty, some important questions to ask would be, are you currently taking graduate students or do you have funding for graduate students? Particularly if you did not apply directly to a PI, for example. What projects are the lab currently working on, or what projects are they predicting that the lab will be working on the next couple of years, as well as what projects would a new graduate student be working on? As well as if there's any collaborations across labs in the department, and also asking PIs of interest what their mentorship style is and if that might be a good match for you. And then finally, some information from graduate students that you can gather. So, from graduate students in your lab or labs of interest, you can ask them to talk about the lab environment and what a typical day in the lab is, as well as what the mentorship style of the PI is, because oftentimes the PI and the graduate student might describe the mentorship style a little bit differently. And any graduate student can answer or talk about the university environment. So, is it collaborative, more competitive? Feelings of support and community from the university or program, overall quality of life. So, how is the work life balance being a graduate student in this program? As well as how far does the stipend go? And is it livable in the city that you're living in, for example? And what graduate students like to do for fun out in the city. So these are some additional resources that are offered through Project Short as well as other organizations. I will go ahead and include a PDF version of the slides in the chat for everyone. And all the Project Short mentees should also be receiving an email with these slides as well, where you can click the links. Okay, so now we'll go ahead and do the Q&A session. I'm joined by the lovely Maria and Hannah, who will be helping me out today. Maria is a neuroscience, pharmaceutical sciences postdoc at New York University, and Hannah is a PhD student in molecular and integrative physiology at the University of Michigan. And then I am a PhD student in clinical psychology at the University of Florida. So I will go ahead and stop sharing and recording now.